What role can the media play in the church's efforts to proclaim the good news, evangelize the culture, and form the faithful? Join us today as we talk about faith and media with Doug Keck, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of EWTN, as well as longtime host of Bookmark. I'm Michael Hernon, Vice President of Advancement at Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio, and you're watching Franciscan University Presents. Stay with us. Welcome to Franciscan University Presents. I'm your host, Michael Hernon, Vice President of Advancement at Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio. Today on Franciscan University Presents, we're going to be talking about faith and media. Joined here in our studios by our regular panelists, Dr. Regis Martin, Professor of Systematic Theology here at Franciscan University, and Dr. Scott Hahn, the Father Michael Scanlan Chair in Biblical Theology and the New Evangelization here at Franciscan University. And our special guest today is probably no stranger to EWTN, is Doug Keck, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for EWTN. Before joining EWTN, he had over 20 years in national and regional TV and radio. At EWTN, you're in charge of all the production for radio and TV. EWTN now reaches, I think, 228 million. Does that sound right? Okay.
That sounds about right.
And 140 different countries. And
that sounds good, too.
It's worldwide.
Right.
You're also the regular host for Bookmarks here on EWTN, and for about 16 years.
That's right, since January of '98, the first shows we started airing.
It's a wonder they can spare you.
Well, you know what, it's good. When you're the executive producer, you don't have to worry about coming up for renewal. You know? I have a feeling if somebody else was deciding whether the show was working, it might not have lasted as long.
That's right. Well, we're glad.
Yeah.
Well, today we're talking about faith in the media, and you clearly have a background, both from secular media as well as now with EWTN. What is the church, how do we look at it from a church's perspective on media? Or what's its opinion or perspective on media?
Well, I think obviously, my take is obviously, I think like all things Catholic, the media itself is good. It's really how it's used or not used appropriately that's the problem. And we see even with our recent Holy Fathers and our present Holy Father in the sense of going out there, using an iPad, Twitter, all these kinds of things, social media. Even in the last couple of years, you've seen the whole Vatican apparatus switch over to a much more online format. They've got a new website. So the church has clearly seen that using social media, improving communications, they've made some changes there. There'll probably be some other ones down the road, I think, to try to get the church's message out there. So I think there's clearly an understanding that we should be using everything that's out there, all the new technologies, to spread the truth, which is certainly what EWTN has been trying to do as well.
That's right.
And there's a legacy of this. I mean, going back to the late 30s when Pius XII took over the chair of Peter, he began those radio broadcasts that were worldwide, Christmas messages and other things too. But I mean, the 50s would mark, the decade, the era of Fulton Sheen, who won Emmys and that sort of thing too. So again, we're not latecomers, but I do think that the culture has changed so much that our relationship to the media has changed. Yeah. And not altogether for the good, but it does present all kinds of opportunities, especially with the internet and so on.
Yes.
Let me give you a caricature, at least I hope it's a caricature, and get your take on it. On the one hand, we have very savvy media folk out there who tend to be secularist. On the other hand, we have faith-filled folk who don't know anything about media. And how do the two come together? How do we square these two sets of people?
Well, I think the fact is, I think there's a lot of faith-filled, very talented Catholics who are out there, who are working out there in the media, who I think haven't seen an opportunity to use their skill set that way, and maybe are interested in moving from, let's say, money to mission or something like that. And I think sometimes it's the old build it and they will come. I think if they start to see that there are opportunities for people to do this, and that also, they're lay people, they need to make a living. They still have a family. They have to have an opportunity where they can move into something which still works for them that way, and at the same time, they can work on something that they get fulfilled in. I think there's a lot of people out there in the media who feel that way. but they just don't see an opportunity to do it. They also don't talk about it at work because it wouldn't be perceived very well.
That's right.
But it is the difficulty, I think, with all these kinds of things, is to be able to say, on one level, people demand this output that they expect to see. Well, how come we don't look as good as this network and that network? At the same time, the understanding that those things are not done by magic. They're done by money in many cases. So if you can get dedicated people working with less, you can do less. Look at the Catholic schools. It's a perfect example. You know, it's not as much money, but it's some money that you still have to do, and they do a better job. And I think there's opportunities, you know, for specifically oriented Catholic programming, like an EWTN in a 1,000-channel universe where people want what they want when they want it. And there's also great opportunities for others to do other variations on that are less overt in promoting a culture of life or positive family life.
There is a message for EWTN, and that is, look, if a nun can do this with a shoebox of cash, you know, and a lot of faith, then you ought to be trying something, you know.
Stepping out.
What was the year that EWTN began again?
1981.
81. I remember being a doctoral student in Milwaukee and hearing the stories of Harry John and the money from the Sacred Heart Group, and how Santa Fe Communications was almost begun on the West Coast, and all of the top equipment was purchased, and nothing happened. It just flopped. But all of that equipment was bought, a dime on a dollar, by this nun from Cleveland who went down to Alabama. I mean, it's an inspiration because back then, it was already the case the culture wasn't friendly. You know, but you know, the network here in so many ways has a catechetical mission and a focus, but that leaves a wide berth, a lot of options. I hope that younger entrepreneurial apostles might be watching and thinking, you know, drama or something else.
That's
right. I mean, I know it's spreading out with Colleen and the news and Raymond as well.
And I think you're 100% right, because I know sometimes I think there can be frustrations for people out there who look and they have a view of what should be getting done, and they say, well, how come you're not doing this? And I always go back to Mother, who would always say to people, listen, that's a great mission you have. That's just not particularly our mission.
That's right.
We're a catechetical network, first and foremost. If you want it Catholic straight up, you come to us. You know, if you want to be entertained, we'll try to make it interesting, and we are trying to make it more interesting. We're bringing in movies and other things, and certainly, you know, more money being invested in things like that. But at the same time, there's nothing stopping others from doing those other things, except the problem is, many cases, it's money.
That's right. That's right.
So let's clear the air up straight away. You're not troubled at all by the use of this particular technology. I mean, you view it as morally neutral, sort of ethically innocuous. What counts is what it's used for, right?
Without a doubt.
The message is more important
I think
than
it's,
the medium.
you know, I'm not a theologian. I always think that's God. Everything God created and made available is good. It's how we misuse it that's the problem.
But he didn't really create these media.
Well, he created the intelligence in people to be able to do it, and the drive to be able to succeed.
I mean, any more, I suppose, than he created the printing press, but that too is baptizable.
And it's been used to print the Bible, and it was used to print some terrible things.
Well, let me go in a slightly different direction, because when people often think about media, particularly Catholics or faithful Christians, have a little bit of a negative view, because they often see what the daily news, or you know, in the publications or in the TV shows or radio or whatever might be out there. And there's often negative perception, anti-life, anti-good Christian culture, and a real serious bias. You know, when we look at that, I mean, is that an accurate portrayal of the media, that there is a bias towards people of faith or things of our values and our faith life?
From my own personal experience and working in 20 years and understanding that, knowing the people who are behind the scenes, the reality is it is. In their mind, it's not a bias. In their mind, it's the way you actually should be thinking. And the people
it's their reality.
And they don't know anybody else who, you know, there was an old line, I remember from 1968 when Nixon won the presidency, so how old I am. Pauline Kael, who was a reviewer for movies in New York Times, said, how did Nixon win? I don't know anyone who voted for him. And, you know, it was a famous line, but you can apply that to anything. For these same people, pro-lifers are strange creatures with patches on their jackets. They don't get it. That's not the world they live in. And so there's no countervailing opinion to even make them question it. And so they just go along with in the normal soup that they swim in. And so I think they go into it, the kinds of people who tend to get into media and to exist in there, they're hired by other people with certain opinions. I also think we're dealing with the world that's so much more like, because of the bifurcation and the separation of channels, you're getting to have a little bit what they had in Europe for years, a little more where there's all these papers, you know this paper's angle, you know this paper's, in the United States, there was always at least this facade of that this was middle of the road, this was fair. Walter Cronkite was a big liberal, but he really didn't show it so much, at least on the air, even though maybe it impacted what he was doing on the air. Today, you have Fox, CNN, MSNBC. People can see, sort of. And so what we're finding is, like in other parts of the world, people tend to gravitate to the channel or the news source that agrees with them.
That's an important point, because I think we forget that objectivity is no longer neutrality. It was in the first half of the 20th century, and it spilled over. But I think what we have to realize now is that when you're talking to an atheist or an agnostic or a radical secularist, that's objectivity, as much as the Catholic faith is what objective reality consists of for us. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you have hermetically sealed compartments, because friendship, professional collaboration, especially if you can do a job that is respectable, you can then build bridges and sort of do apostolate through friendship and collaboration. But I do think we're at a point now that is, it's becoming more of opposition all the time.
Yeah, and I think they don't even realize it necessarily. Like you had said, it's just the world that they see. It's that their dinner parties, their cocktail parties, all their friends are breathing the same air. I mean, which is why when the university and the U.S. bishops, EWTN, we sued the federal government. It was a historic moment. And not one TV station, not NBC, CBS, ABC, gave it any airtime, and it was on page 13 of the New York Times. It was they didn't even cover the story. Yeah, but it's not even an issue for them. They don't see it as a story. Those sorts of.
Well, I think also we have an administration that's very good at saying things that make it sound like everything's fine. Promise people it's going to be okay. It's all taken care of. This organization, religious organizations are taken care of. The fine print is where you run into the problem, of course, as Bishop Sheen said, And so it's that idea that I think, so the general public, which only has a general idea what's going on, they walk away saying, well, everything's okay. You said it was okay. Why are you all upset?
That's right.
I mean, oftentimes when everything becomes televised, style displaces substance. You had mentioned Nixon and Pauline Kael. In 1960, which really dates me, those celebrated debates with John Kennedy, Nixon clearly outpointed him. He was the better
People
debater.
who listened on radio thought
That's
that.
right.
Is that right? Well,
Right. People on radio thought Nixon won. People watched it on TV thought
But
Kennedy.
that 5 o'clock shadow, I think, destroyed him telegenically, and people assumed, oh, Kennedy is the better guy.
Right.
He's
The
gonna be
JFK
president.
charm.
Yeah.
His
Style
charm,
over substance.
his style.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a danger that we court. But there's another danger. I mean, the diversity we welcome, but at the same time, it brings on fragmentation, and it becomes less possible to fashion a common culture, a common conversation that we need to have in this country, because there are just so many options.
Well, that's the old Ed Sullivan factor. Years ago, for those old enough, everybody watched Ed Sullivan. Everybody knew what was on. There was only so many channels. Everybody watched most of the same shows.
So you could talk about Ed Sullivan, Steve Allen, or whoever it was.
But I always think about, I remember watching, it used to be the U.S. was a melting pot. And then I remember it was in the 80s or 90s, suddenly we were a mosaic. We weren't a melting pot anymore, we're a mosaic. And what's a mosaic? Something that looks like it's together from a distance, but you get up close and it's not. It's fragmented. And I think that's where we are. And unfortunately, there's political motivations for keeping people into distinct groups.
I think we need to recognize that communism was sort of the thing that united us. So the Republicans and Democrats differed.
It was a clear enemy.
Anti-communism was, we could debate what strategy is going to be the most effective to combat communism. And then when the Iron Curtain collapses in '89, everything changes. And then for a brief moment after 9/11, it looked like anti-radical Islam might unite us as well. And for about a year, it did. And then I think for various reasons, that sort of
It just sort of dissipated.
That's right.
My wife and I, for example, we tune into Fox, and we noticed how exercised they were about Benghazi, this crisis, and we were convinced this will bring down the republic. I mean, we're going to put Obama in prison for this, and yet it suddenly occurred to us, nobody's watching Fox. I mean, they don't have. They haven't cornered the market. There are so many other markets.
Well, I think
that's the thing.
Yeah, I think the point people need to realize sometimes on the cable side is, yes, they're the dominant news source on cable, but you're still talking about millions, a couple of millions of people. Even the old mainline network news still draws, substantially more millions to watch them, just because of what people watch on cable versus having regular television. And I think the other thing is, the problem is that the people who are going to Fox, let's say, already probably think with that and agree with it. The people they need to convince are watching MSNBC or CNN or some other network. And if the mainstream networks don't determine that this is something they want to push, then the average person doesn't see it, or they're told it wasn't a big deal, and so people go away because people don't think about things they don't need to think about.
We're talking about faith and media on Franciscan University Presents. Stay with us.
When you compare commercial media to a value-based media, where we're trying to present Catholicism through that media, you're comparing commercialism to a media that's trying to present Catholicism, trying to present truth, beauty, and goodness.
After I graduate, I want to go to Hollywood because there is such a need for missionary work there. So many people who work in the entertainment industry, they're so broken, and I want to bring my Catholic faith, my values, and who I am to be there and be a witness for them and bring truth, beauty, and goodness to them.
So when I graduate, I want people to look at me and my job and the way I do my work and think, wow, he's really good at what he does, and he's Catholic. They don't expect that. And through that, maybe I can let that influence, subtly things that I do with my job and my work in the secular world to really bring the faith to a world that's very anti-faith and anti-Catholic.
My name is Kelly Butler, and I'm a communication arts major. I took independent digital filmmaking. Definitely intense. Many all-nighters in the editing lab getting things done. Pope John Paul II has a quote, "Do not be afraid to go out into the streets and into public places to preach Christ like the first apostles." That's what we're called to as Catholics and as Christians. You have that responsibility that every work you create should reflect Christ. Franciscan University is academically excellent and passionately Catholic.
Welcome back to Franciscan University Presents. We're talking about faith and the media with executive from EWTN, Doug Keck. Doug, so we talked a little about the secular media, talked about the state of media. Is it a good thing that we have a brand of media that's tailor-made for Catholics?
Well, I work at EWTN, so certainly I think that's a good idea, obviously. But I think especially in the way I think about it, which is as a catechetical network, and again, coming out of working for cable for 20 years and working for Chuck Dolan, who started HBO and was talking about the magazine rack approach to channels and things like this, and the million channels and the 500 channels, and everybody's going to have a channel. The idea, I really think, and I mentioned it earlier, is people want what they want when they want it. It's kind of the internet approach, bang, 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 bang. And you're going to have a lot more of that even in TV, where people will basically be programming their own channels for themselves. So I think brand is important because ultimately when there's so many, people default to the few, the ones that they can deal with, because they don't want to think about all these other ones. So I think for EWTN, it's like ESPN. When you go to ESPN, you know what you're going to see. When you go to this channel, you know what you're going to see. There's the history channel, there's the military channel, there's this channel, that channel. It's very, very clear what you're going to get. And that's what people want, because what they don't want to do is go through Life magazine anymore. They want to go through the left-handed tennis player guide, because that's what they are, and that's what they want to spend their time on.
That's what they're looking for.
Right, so that's what they're looking for. And I think for us, and my answer to people with that is to say, we're there to provide that. Our job is not to convert everybody. Our job is for you to convert your friends and your family. We're there to give you the sustenance so that you can live out your faith, know you're not crazy for believing it, and that as you start to live out your life and do these things, people start to say, gee, what's going on in your life? What's happening with you? Just like any other, I think, conversion experience where that impacts people. The idea that you're going to drag your brother over and stick him in front of the TV set and that's going to change everything, it's just not true. Unless you're open in some way or the Lord is start to open you up, I don't think you can do that.
But don't you think sometimes we can run into the risk of just preaching to the choir with a Catholic?
Well, I use the same line all the time. Have you seen the choir lately? I think there's plenty of. This is the way I look at it. Think about even the fact that the poor numbers of people who go to Mass every Sunday, right? So maybe it's 20 million, let's say, out of the allegedly 77 million Catholics in the United States. What percentage of those people live out the faith as seen by the magisterium? If you could get those people, or 10 or 20% more of those people, to really be informed on what, and to live out their faith from Sunday to Sunday, and not just every other, showing up on Sunday, but living it during the week, why isn't that a good goal? Why isn't that a good target to get to? When you're selling tennis rackets, you don't advertise tennis rackets in bowling magazines hoping that you can entice bowlers to come over. You put them in tennis magazines. So it's the same thing. The first group we should be reaching, in my mind, is the people who actually go to Mass and already believe. I mean, when people are trying to convert Catholics, who do Protestants go to? They don't go to non-believers, they go to Catholics. Why? Because there's already a foundation to pull them in. It's adding in. So the first thing is to do that. If we've maximized that, then I think that's fine. If everybody who goes to Mass on Sunday is doing wonderfully, I guess that's terrific. But I also think, the fact that that's our mission doesn't mean that precludes others from having their mission.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I do think that the strategy of EWTN is concentric in this sense, that you do have a common core of committed Catholics who are watching it regularly. But they don't live in isolation, They're not just Carmelites who are secluded.
Right.
So they have family members, they have friends. But I think a couple of rings out, you also have this experience, at least I've had it many times, where non-Catholics, Protestants, especially evangelicals, who might compare us, to Trinity or some other network and compare us favorably, because there's a lot less manipulation or whatever there is. But time and time again, I have found with Marcus Grodi and the Coming Home Network, we founded this about 20 years ago and never dreamt that we'd have over 1,000, ministers and missionaries come in. But I don't know what percentages, but there are high percentages of people who found it on the journey home. Just going surfing the channels and then coming across this discussion, and then staying and then coming back again and again, and then 2 years later they're in a crisis, and then they're discovering Jesus in the Eucharist.
And I think too, with just the Catholic media, whether it be EWTN or other new media initiatives, if you will, preaching the choir is a great thing because it fires us up and sends us out. It gives us the equipment that we need to fight the battle.
It enlarges the choir.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, the immense impact, Scott, that you've had, your life and the books that reflect your journey. I think having EWTN has immeasurably augmented and extended that apostolate.
That's true for so many people. It really is, And what cassette tapes were in the 90s, CDs became the MP3 files as well. And you can see this with Catholic Answers and countless other apostolates, that the more you tap and harness the power of the media, the more you can reach. But again, you're not only equipping the choir to be stronger, you're enlarging that too.
But and you are a realist about the state of the choir, that it is a little threadbare, maybe tone deaf, and somebody needs to sort of choreograph things. But I like this category of viewer. Those who pray, pay, and obey, we accost them first. And then they become the shock troops.
That's right. Sending them out.
Right.
I think so. I mean, I think when you shoot for a target, you shoot for the center first, and as you spray out, you hit others and get there. But I think if your idea is I'm going to get all the unchurched people and spend your time on that, the problem you run into with that many times is if you have a core audience, to reach the people unchurched, usually at least most people's thing is to water down and make it easier. Well, what happens is you don't really attract a lot of those people very long. And second of all, your core starts to dissipate because they start saying, what are you doing here? This is, I'm not getting fed anymore myself. And I think that's really important, that we have to always be consistent. And I think, the reference to TBN, the one thing I always think with TBN is, TBN, one minister to the other, they teach a totally different theology.
What at odds.
We're not. We're totally consistent, whether you like it or not. Every show relates to another show, and it's consistency. And that's what our audience expects. And again, I think that empowers people to feel the journey home is a great way for people to feel empowered about their faith and to realize, like it was for a lot of us when we first heard your tapes, to realize, I knew it was right. Now I understand why it's right. And
that acronym, what do those letters stand for? TBM?
Trinity Broadcasting Network.
And this is Protestant?
Yes, very big. The Crouches, right?
Oh, okay,
Yeah, when you think about the media and the Catholic form, this was founded in 81. John Paul used the phrase new evangelization for the very first time in 79 when he went back to his homeland of Poland. But he really brought it out for the world in 83. In between those 4 years, this is when EWTN was founded. I mean, it really was, on the forefront of the new evangelization, precisely because the new evangelization is about re-evangelizing the de-Christianized.
Right.
And so many people who have drifted away from the Catholic Church need to hear, okay, the 4 spiritual laws, God loves you, you've sinned, Christ died, now believe. But even more, the core of catechesis. And so by defining the principal mission of EWTN from the earliest days as catechesis, Mother Angelica, by the hand of God's providence, really landed upon the one thing needed. 50 years ago, we would not have been a conservative network. We would have been simply Catholic.
Right.
But by saying now what everybody heard at Georgetown, or at Notre Dame 50, 60, 70 years ago, we really stand out. It's an analogous situation with Franciscan University. When you look at our core and our theology requirements, it's like, you couldn't find a Catholic college on the planet that didn't require at least this much and more and deliver stuff that was, magisterial or whatever without being conservative.
Yeah, my sense is that it's just a matter of being simply Catholic, that if you resist or refuse these media, you're not really being fully, comprehensively Catholic. I mean, that exoteric note of the Catholic thing, it extends outward, it's expansive, like the Bernini colonnade of St. Peter's Basilica. It reaches out, it welcomes in this great maternal embrace. You can't refuse anything that might help augment the spread of the gospel.
Right, and I always think with EWTN too, we filled a void there at a period of time when maybe some of the devotional things and those kinds of things and the saints and the Blessed Mother, for whatever reason, weren't as emphasized in some of the parishes, and this was a way to revitalize that and keep that alive for people. And we know Mother's core is Eucharistic adoration. Well, what are we seeing with vocations? What drives vocations?
Right.
Eucharistic adoration drives vocations.
That's right.
So
you had mentioned that your core audience, and for Catholic media, it's not preaching to the choir when we have a core audience of who we're speaking to. But I know you shared with me, and I've heard stories of many non-Catholics who have heard EWTN, and we talked about the surfing through. How do you kind of meet the challenge of knowing who your core audience is, with also making it interesting, possibly for non-believers or non-Catholics?
Well, I think my theory is the truth attracts. So if you stick with the truth, that's a good place to start with. And that's what people are attracted to. When I was, in 1989, 1990, and I was getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to watch Father Rutler stand on what looked like a chessboard and next to a pillar and talk for a half an hour, it wasn't because it was the most engaging media I had ever seen. It was because there was something about what he was saying that was speaking to me.
Right.
Compelling.
So I think, my reverse McLuhanism is instead of the medium is the message is the medium. And I think our job many times is to not obfuscate the message, to try and make it interesting. We try and do that because, again, my theory is always the same thing, which is it's not how many people watch, it's how many people you impact. How many people's lives do you change by watching? Not how many people you somehow corralled into watch.
But he had and still does.
Does it change their lives?
I suspect
That's a great mission.
An
and goal.
undeniable style. I mean, the packaging was attractive, engaging, the wit, the humor, the panache. I mean, that's Father Rutler.
Right.
But you're right, the content survives all of that, and it's telling.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, he's a talking head,
Right.
And so we know that doesn't work, and yet it does. Yeah. And you go back to Paul in 1 Corinthians chapters 1 and 2, he talks about where's the debater, where's the rhetorician, all of the people who used, what were the media of the day. We are stuck with the word of the cross. It's foolishness to the Greeks who seek wisdom. It's a scandal to the Jews who want a sign of divine power. And yet it is true wisdom, it is true power. And I think that the truth is really what attracts it, it's what converts. And sometimes when you scale back, you don't, not only do you not want to obfuscate, but you don't want to overly embellish it.
That's right.
I know that in TV you should do whatever you can, but if you can't do much, you shouldn't despair, especially if catechetics is your focus.
Yeah, well, and also too, I just think that as we go to, how the church always unites truth, beauty, and goodness, and that as we're presenting, as we're communicating, people are drawn in by truth, as well as goodness and beauty, and wrapping it as much as possible in all of those, looking at something that's just attractive, that's appealing, that's tugging on the human heart.
I mean, when you ask yourself, what is the heart of the kerygma? I mean, what did Jesus come to say, to accomplish? You look at his words. I mean, he'll say things like, your sins are forgiven. This is my body. This is my blood. I mean, that's instantly captivating. I mean, who can resist a message like that?
Right, and I think if somebody was fair and would to take a snapshot, of EWTN from over the years, you would see that I think the graphics, the look, and things have been upgraded, have been moved in the right direction.
Right.
But it's always been done in a way that it's designed to not change things too much. And a lot of times our audience are people who are tired of everything changing. They came out of a world where everything changed in the church, everything changed here. They want something to hold on to. Believe me, every time we change something, there's people,
you hear about it, huh?
There's people whose pulses went in sync with the rosary, and you change a different rosary. And God bless them, we understand it. But we really try to do that where we can, but we have to do it in Mother style, incrementally, in such a way that it doesn't disturb those other people, because they're important to us too.
It is the eternal word, television.
So it takes a while.
You don't have to be timely if you're timeless.
That's right,
exactly. And that's what's important, is that you have, and Catholic media needs to have, a kind of a persistent dedication to never watering down the truth in any fashion, shape, or form, no matter what style, no matter what protection, no matter what technical technology that they might add. They always got to stay focused on that.
That's what we're trying to do.
That's great. That's great. You're watching Franciscan University Presents. Stay with us.
Most of us were just audience members that passively received information from the media industry. But now through social media such as Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and all those kinds of things, we can create media and we can share it with other people. And what that means for us and for the typical Catholic is that we can share inspirational messages, share stories of how the faith has benefited us. In other words, we can evangelize people literally around the world.
I love being creative, I love making people laugh, and if I can use that as a Catholic to really share my faith and my values, I think that there's such a need out there for the truth. People are always searching for the truth, and if I can use my talent to share the truth with them, I think I can really make a difference.
Explore the treasures of your Catholic heritage on a Franciscan University pilgrimage. Led by inspiring spiritual directors, you'll walk in the footsteps of saints and martyrs in the Holy Land, Poland, France, and Italy, and you'll deepen your love for Jesus Christ through daily Mass, confession, prayer, and the joy of Christian fellowship. Let Franciscan University lead you on a pilgrimage of faith. Find out more at franciscan.edu/pilgrimages.
Welcome back to Franciscan University Presents. This entire production springs forth from the very heart of Franciscan University. It's being taped right now in our Communication Arts studio here in Steubenville, Ohio. Our students are operating the cameras and the equipment. Our regular panelists are professors here of theology. So we've been talking to Doug Keck today about faith and media. Doug, how can Catholics use media more effectively to reach our culture?
Well, I think obviously EWTN reaches out through many ways. I'll start with us because I represent EWTN. Obviously, we've got 12 television networks worldwide. We're in German, full-time German channel. We have 2 Spanish networks completely distributed in Spain and in South America. We even have shortwave. Scott and I were talking in between. We still have that. It reaches different parts of the world on radio, and particularly our Spanish feed has been very important to the people in Cuba. We've heard that from the bishops there and the cardinal there, how people tune in, and it's been a lifeline for them for the church, and hopefully we'll see the new springtime happening there more and more. And obviously on the internet, our website, we've got 230,000 plus fans on Facebook. We're on Twitter, we're on Pinterest, we're on all these different things.
Roku and everything else.
Roku, so it's OTT, it's a way you can get it if you don't have cable. That's why we came up with the EWTN Everywhere. I had so many people come up to me, I love EWTN, but I just can't get it. And I'd say, you can get it, trust me. If you got a high-speed internet connection, you can get it. You can watch us on the web. You can get an OTT type box like a Roku or the others, and that's going to be expanding. Intel, Apple, they're all going to be rolling those.
Now you mentioned the Ukraine also. Now,
Yes.
Ukraine is getting EWTN as well.
Yeah, what we did was worked out a relationship there. And what they do is they downlink our feed, and then they have a dedicated group of volunteers who translate all the programs into Ukrainian and then put it on their cable system. And it's distributed throughout, and we think in the next period of time, distributed completely throughout Ukraine. We're looking at possibilities of putting that up on the satellite, also doing something in Poland. Sweden, Archbishop Aurelius in Sweden is very interested in that model and seeing there's a way they can do that in Sweden to downlink it and translate it. We're obviously in UK, Ireland, we're in Africa, obviously the Philippines, we're expanding now in Australia. We have
It is
lots
the
of
eternal
opportunity.
word.
And it's getting out there just like Mother said it should be. So we're trying to do
It's
that.
not only eternal, but it's ubiquitous.
Well, we're
Yes,
trying,
that's right.
and at least our whole thing is to say, listen, it's like the church. We propose, we don't impose. It's available if you'd like it. If you don't want to watch EW, that's fine with me. It's not a problem. Or if you don't have to tell me, well, I can't get it or I'd watch it. I understand that. But I just want to make sure, like we've heard so many people say, why didn't somebody tell me about this before? Why didn't I know this was out there? Because there are people who are hungry. Once they start getting the truth, you become insatiable. You start going, it's like being a tapeworm or listening to tapes or suddenly you're reading all these books because you're being fed. You're like you were starving. And we have people who clearly will say, I just started to watch you and now that's the only channel I watch anymore. Now, that's not our goal. If that's good for you, that's great. But really, again, I think our whole thing is I always think of Mount Tabor. The idea, for all of us, we have this great experience, we want to hang out on a mountain. But then we find out, no, you've been given this gift so you can go down into the valley and go back to Jerusalem. And that's what we're trying to do, is equip Catholics so they can live out their faith in the real world. And they can impact, because unfortunately, and I think it's fair to say, many people have seen that rather than Catholics reaching out in some ways and going into the culture and after Vatican II and impacting the culture is had a more negative impact, it seems to be, on Catholics.
So going beyond EWTN, what can some Catholics who aren't executives of a global television network, what can they do to?
Well, I think like anybody, I think you can be a consumer, and I think you can make sure you watch things that are good and don't watch things that aren't good and make people aware of it. I mean, because the reality is, it's all about money. Now, these people have agendas, but they also make money, and that's what it. If it impacts in the pocketbook, there's a way to do that. I think we have to be careful that we're just not naysayers. That when somebody does something positive, let's support it, like the Passion movie was, or something like that, or even some of these Christian movies that I know good friends say, oh, they're like TV movies. But somebody's trying to do something good. It's not perfect. Don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. You're trying to do it better. It's like EWTN. It's not perfect. It's a little better than it was before. Okay, so it's not reaching everybody, but at least support it. It's like anybody. If somebody's starting to move in the right direction, even in your personal life, who's got problems, it's starting to come back to the church. You don't tell them, well, you've got to get back here right now. That's not enough. It's like, what do? You encourage and say, great. You're moving in the right direction now. What can I help you to do so that you can come all the way? What materials can I give you to help? I think it's the same way we have to do with the media, which is to be positive about them when they do something right. And at the same time, stand up against things we don't have with our dollar.
There's a certain temptation, which I think right-wing Catholics are susceptible to, a kind of cynicism, a kind of neurosis. They might argue, okay, EWTN, but for the sake of that channel, we have to suffer the smut on all of the other channels. Is it a trade-off? Is it worth it? And they would argue, no. The whole thing is a wasteland. It's a sinkhole of corruption.
Well, first of all,
just pull the plug.
To deal with that in some ways, that's why we've tried to make it available in different modalities so that you don't have to necessarily go to the same place. At the same time, that's something Mother dealt with years ago, which is, or St. Paul, he's got to be in the marketplace. If you're not in the marketplace,
That's right.
How can
not
people
available
see
to
you?
people.
I mean, it's to some degree, it's people have their own personal responsibility. The fact that channel is there doesn't mean you have to watch it. or let people watch it, or that you can't block it. In many cases, you can.
Yeah.
So, sometimes,
There's no proof that in Acts 17, Paul converted even 10% of the Athenians listening to him.
Right.
But the one who's identified by name, Dionysius, becomes the first bishop of Athens, and there's a great heritage or a tradition associated with him. I remember really being down on Facebook. That's all I, heard people talking about. And then our first grandchild was born, and her pictures were posted. And within 24 hours, I was on Facebook, And in the process, I discovered that there was somebody who I don't know had a Scott Hahn page. And so I had it brought down, but they suggested, why don't you do it? And so I did.
Right.
And I just, every week or two, I post something of Mother Teresa. 526,000 reach. It's like, what an amazing, a little goes longer and farther than anything you could imagine.
That's powerful to see that's where our social media is today. Both in the TV and online, where it's reaching
it's
new
the new Areopagus.
Yeah.
I think.
And the com box, you get comments and you realize these aren't all choir members.
Right, exactly.
But there is a lot of junk out there.
Without a doubt.
Sure. It might be mostly junk, but it's still.
I'm struck by something Fred Allen said back in the 50s.
My Lord, Fred Allen.
When the junk wasn't quite so pernicious, but TV is chewing gum for the eyes.
Well, remember, Fred Allen had a great face for radio, they used to say. Though he had a great voice.
You have a great face for TV. I mean, you're the new Walter Cronkite.
Oh, really?
Wonderfully avuncular appearance. People trust you.
Also has fostered a Catholic subculture. I doubt Raymond can go very many places, and now it's Pauline's turn and Father Mitch, and that sort of thing. And it happens to me, too, and I only have a few isolated programs. But to me, it's an encouragement because then you can look at radio and see spin-offs. And you can also see throughout the country entrepreneurs, apostles who are buying radio stations, and doing all sorts of things that are
Of course, the downside is people will accost you, strangers, and say, I saw you on television the other night, and I'm always tempted to ask, how long did you stay? Because I suspect not very long, really. I mean, they're floating, they're cruising, and they're going to go elsewhere. So you arrest the attention. I mean, you've got to slay your audience in the opening metaphor. But how do you keep them beyond the first commercial?
I guess I would say that's up to the Holy Spirit.
That's exactly right.
He's pretty busy.
Yeah, I know he's busy, but I mean,
effective too.
But I think Mother used to say, our job is to soak the earth with the truth. Getting into people's hearts and their homes is ultimately God's responsibility or the person's responsibility. That's why we try to have varying lengths, times, whatever. If the only thing you got was this one particular quote or that, and that somehow played in your head and made some impact on your life, then that's good.
Well, what I find really impressive is that you've managed to penetrate what used to be really closed societies, like Cuba. I mean, they access you. Can the government block this, or they're not disposed to do so?
It's possible. Shortwave's more difficult to block like that because of the nature of the propagation of the waves. But at this point in time, they've got so many other problems. It's not one of the things I worry about anymore.
This is sort of like a new Bay of Pigs invasion.
There you go.
Right.
But it's going to succeed.
That's right.
It's the leaven of the gospel.
Ultimately, it's like what happened in Eastern Europe. Everybody thought the faith was dead until the wall came down, and all these Christians came out of the woodwork. And they can't figure out, I thought we killed these guys. It never dies.
Yeah.
That's right.
The parable of the sower in Matthew 13, I think, is really appropriate because when you look at what the sower is doing, it seems rather reckless, almost indiscriminate. He's just throwing, and the results are so various. 30, 60, and 100. Not to mention the thorns and the rocks and the shallow soil. That's clearly the eternal word being sown worldwide. But again, I want to underscore how it's really an incentive for people to learn from EWTN, to emulate. Imitation's still the highest form of flattery.
Without a doubt.
I think there are people today, whether you look at the movies, whether you look at like Coming Home with their advertisements going on to secular media, trying to invite people back.
Tom Peterson.
Tom Peterson's doing great work there. And so many other, new evangelization efforts to really get into the secular culture with some life-saving messages, because it really is the eternal truth. It looks differently if it's on your news broadcast versus what's on EWTN, but I think there's so many things that we got to scatter that out there. Be that sower. And there's probably people watching right now that maybe have that idea or have that passion or have the means to support others to do that.
Do you have a way of measuring your audience? How many people, in fact, are tuning in, watching?
We don't have a way. We're not interested particularly in a way because, Mother's version was always the same thing, which is if you start worrying too much about what people like, you end up pandering to what they like and not what they need. Right. And you have to be careful about that idea. And I think for us, again, the nature of EWTN as a donation thing is as long as there's a perceived value that people have to support us, then we know. And people have continued to support us going along, and certainly the feedback we get is positive. Obviously, we could be doing more. People have wonderful ideas of things. In many cases, it's just they don't understand the complexities that are involved with some of the issues, the amount of money it takes to produce something like this. I mean, a big venture we have now, reaching out to some way, is with Colin Carroll Campbell, EWTN's News Nightly show, which we're just starting to get rolled out. It's a very difficult show. News is a tough business. But again, we want to present something, and we've shown people that it's going to be a high-end looking program that people can feel comfortable with. And we hope there'll be some people watch EWTN who say, news isn't that important to me, but at least I can find out what's going on. For others, at least there's an opportunity to get context, to be able to say, what the Pope said this yesterday. Now Colleen's in it. Now Scott Hahn's on there, kind of talking about, or Bishop Laurie shows up, or like the Gosnell story.
That's right.
Now there was a story that was horrific.
That's right.
And the mainstream media didn't carry it. That would have been a story, the kinds of thing that we could have put in context for people. And again, not so that they go back and turn their TV off, but when they watch Fox or they watch CNN, they go, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I've got the
other side of the
story now, and I understand why the church feels
that kind of thing
that.
comes up at the water cooler too, or at the lunch break, and this is where I think people can really do a personal apostolate, because you talk about the books you read, the TV shows you watch, and everybody's talking about the news. But I think if you can give an alternative perspective and identify where they can go, that's also a way. You just never know what's going to grow from those kind of seeds.
And I think you've mentioned this before about the water cooler conversation, and I just think that is key when we look at whether it be the book you're reading, the talk you just heard, the show you just watched, whatever it might be. It's great to spark that conversation, to go deeper on a subject, and then hopefully through those programs you've actually got a little bit of meat to that subject as well. So
you also have a pretty engaging catalyst. I mean, when you think of Colleen Carroll Campbell, I mean, on purely aesthetic grounds, she's more pleasing to look at than any of us.
Just like Mother Angelica.
That I will.
Yeah, there's an aura there that's supernatural. And I should add,
Mother's case,
I think Mother's probably winning as much grace now in her suffering as she did when she was hosting the program. I can't help but think that we'll find out when we enter eternity, just the super.
That's more difficult to measure than your audience.
And the network has grown substantially larger, faster than ever since that point in time. So we believe that's clearly Mother's prayer.
That's beyond the counterintuitive. That's supernatural.
That's great to have that kind of spiritual leadership, because that's what we need to do the new evangelization.
You bet.
You're watching Franciscan University Presents. Stay with us.
So how can we summarize all this talk about church and the media? I think Blessed John Paul II said it best when he gave us 3 things to think about. 1, formation. It's not just about how to use technology, it's about how media affects us, affects our children. 2, dialogue. When we communicate, we ought to be reflecting Jesus Christ, reflecting the gospel. 3, participation. What is our attitude? How are we participating in the media? Are we doing it in healthy ways, pleasing to our Lord?
My name is Joseph Krelich. I'm a chemistry major, biology minor here at Franciscan University. I love the atmosphere, just completely centered around the Catholic faith. When I play soccer, when I'm in classes, everything has that same Catholic attitude. Myself and a few other chemistry majors had the opportunity to work with top scientists in order to combat neglected diseases. I was able to connect my love for chemistry and also my love for mission work by synthesizing chemical compounds. Franciscan University is academically excellent and passionately Catholic.
Welcome back to Franciscan University Presents. We've been talking about faith and media with Doug Keck, executive at EWTN. Regis, could you start us off with some highlights and summation points?
Yeah, I think a spirit of optimism is something we're entitled to promote here, because we have a message, a product that is really irresistible. It's the truth. And the truth became flesh, and what you do at EWTN is a kind of extension of that enfleshment in other media, other ways. Tolkien once said that never was a tale told that men would rather find to be true. And it is true. And people have a hunger for the truth, and they'll make sacrifices for it. I also think of a beautiful line from Guardini, that in the experience of a great love, everything that happens becomes an event related to that love. I mean, under the impact, the sudden coming into time of Christ, all of these rays emanate out to the very ends of the earth. And all we have to do is receive them and talk about them and show the world how galvanized we are by the impact of the event of Jesus Christ. And that's what you're doing. And dialogue, I think, is at the heart of it. We can't lock ourselves inside the chapel. We have to go out and somehow impart the truth of the message to people who need to hear it, who need to be saved. And you're an instrument of that, and I can't thank you enough for your energy, your tireless diligence and devotion to this cause. I hope it prospers for a very long time to come.
Thank you, Regis. Scott?
There's so much anecdotal evidence in my experience, when I go on family vacations and I hear from my non-Catholic relatives about Uncle Scott being on EWTN. But, I think my favorite experience of all is when I got a text on my smartphone, white smoke. And we were driving across Ohio on Route 80 from visiting our grandchildren, and we pulled off at the next rest stop. And of course, they didn't have EWTN on the TV. So Jeremiah pulled out his laptop and we watched it live streaming, for about an hour. And we were so excited, of course. Here is Pope Benedict retiring, and then, Pope Francis coming on. And people would stop by, what are you doing? Because the family was obviously very engaged. But I think of the spillover that EWTN has in countless families, and hundreds of thousands, millions of lives with respect to Jesus and the Eucharist and the truth of sacred Scripture and the catechetical, really the evangelistic message that gets out. And then I think of World Youth Day and what an impact it's made. I remember two different people who were Protestant pastors who watched two different World Youth Days on EWTN. And they both described this tearful sense that this is my father, and this was a key step on the journey. So World Youth Day and the Pope and how he really articulates the gospel. I think of the Blessed Virgin Mary as well, and the ways in which, this is now, not just in the past, but also in the future, Fatima and Lourdes. These are places I'm finally going to get to in terms of pilgrimages, but the thought that people who can never go on pilgrimages are going to get to see events there at Fatima and Lourdes and Guadalupe and so on. It really makes the Catholic faith truly Catholic for homebound people, but for people who are just raising big families and strapped and they can never get to these places, World Youth Day. And yet I have no doubt that, for so many parishes that will never number, Eucharistic adoration was made possible because of the teaching, because of the example, because of the talk show, whatever it was. And much, much more. And the grace of conversions for teenagers, as an alternative to what else you can find on the internet. So, please express to I'll just say it to Mother Angelica's guardian angel, thanks be to God, and thank her for us too. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Scott. And Doug?
Well, I would say certainly one thing I think we should all thank is Mother Angelica. I mean, this is Mother's mission. We're all just trying to help with that mission. And I could tell the people watch EWTN as we try every day to stay true to that mission as best we can. We don't always succeed with everything we try to do, but it's goodwill, and we're trying to do the right thing. And we apologize for all our shortcomings many times to people who have very valid concerns and questions about why we can't do this and do that. And they mean well, and we try and do those things. But we're doing the best we can. We believe that getting out that catechesis, I think the church itself has seen now that if you want people to go out and engage the culture, they need to be catechized. They need to know their faith. I think the other thing that we have tried to do, and I think you pointing out some of the big events like that, was World Youth Day. I think the March for Life in Washington. Now the March for Life, the Walk for Life West Coast that we just did this year, the first time we did the March in Canada. We've seen by having those things that other places in other parts of the world are starting to do those things. And what's really important, I think, for EWTN, for people, homebound or people just trying to live out their faith, is to realize you're not alone, that there is a family, there is a community. Mother has talked about the EWTN family. Well, this greater family, it's the Catholic Church. And the idea that, you know what, wow, there's 100,000, 200,000 people marching in Washington. I never see these pictures. Where do they come from? You know, here up there, and what it does is it forces at some level the secular media to start to pay attention. So somebody like a Fox will start to show more, or C-SPAN will show more. By having that alternative, or showing it up in Canada, it invigorates people, makes them realize, you know, there's a place I can go, I can support, I'm not alone. And I think that's what many of us feel, and many times is this idea that, you know, I must be weird because I believe these things, or nobody else, or if I say it, they're going to think. I think there's a lot of people who, after living in the culture we live in today, realize it's not working. And they kind of know where they got to go, but they're embarrassed. They don't want to admit it. And I think we give a way that you can, in the privacy of your home, engage your faith without risking feeling foolish. And I think if that helps people and emboldens them slowly to feel better about that, to get back to Mass. As we said, we're not replacing the parish. Nobody said put a large screen monitor on the top of the altar and watch EWTN. No, what we want is to empower people from Sunday to Sunday to live out their faith and go back to the church and be engaged and support the work of their local pastor.
That's perfect. Well, Doug, thank you for being on the show today, and also for speaking to our students here on campus, inspiring them to be leaders in a virtual world, I think, as we talked about. If you've enjoyed today's show, we have a free handout for you. It's an interview we did with Father Jonathan Morris on this very topic of faith and media. Father Jonathan Morris, from analyst on Fox News, and also a former student here at the university. So as we look at media today, we need to recognize that all of us have an obligation, have a part to play, whether we're an executive producer at EWTN, a faculty here at the university who are speaking and teaching, or someone at home, whether it be online, whether it be Facebook, whether it be blogs, whether it be starting your own production in some level. We all have an obligation to do it. Sometimes we get hesitant to go out and share, think that it may not be accepted or readily received. We have to remember that the message we want to share is the truth of Jesus Christ. And they are dying to hear that truth. They may not realize it, but the truth is, as we talk about EWTN, it's the eternal truth. It's the eternal word that really is life-saving. And third, let's make sure we don't put our low achievements at work. When we're talking about the truth, we want to give it the best of our efforts. The Vatican document talked about giving everything we can in our excellence and skill to make the truth present. This whole program, Franciscan University, springs forth from the very heart of Franciscan University, and our mission is to form the students who are transforming the world. And I want to invite you to be a part of that mission, possibly by coming here to study for your degree, or online through getting a master's degree, or coming to one of our summer conferences, or visiting some of the holy shrines through our pilgrimages, or visit us at faithandreason.com, where you can get this download and great videos, Doug's talk, and so many other things at faithandreason.com. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Thank you for watching Franciscan University Presents.
To download the free handout on today's topic, go to faithandreason.com. Email your request for the handout to presents@franciscan.edu. At faithandreason.com, you can also purchase past episodes of Franciscan University Presents, or request today's free handout and purchase past programs by calling 888-333-0381. That's 888-333-0381, or call 740-283-6357.